The night was heavy with rain, the kind that made the world outside sound like it was drowning. Water rushed down the streets, and every window in the small house shook under the weight of the storm. Inside, the human sat alone, half asleep, listening to the endless drumming of raindrops on the roof. He thought the night would pass quietly, but then a sound broke through the storm, 3 soft knocks on his door. At first, he thought it was the wind, but the knocks came again, sharper this time, desperate and hurried. His chest tightened. Nobody visited at midnight, not in such weather. Cautiously, he stood up, each step toward the door echoing in the silence of his home. His hand hesitated on the handle. The storm howled as if warning him not to open it. Still, curiosity and something deeper, an uneasy pull, forced him to unlock the door. The moment he pulled it open, the storm shoved its way inside, cold air slapping his skin. But the real shock stood in front of him. A figure leaned against the doorframe, soaked from head to toe. It was a woman, or almost a woman, though her features told him she was not human. Her skin glowed faintly under the flashes of lightning, her eyes large, glassy, and filled with shame. Her hair clung to her face, dripping water onto the floor. She was shaking violently, as if she had been out in the rain for hours. Her lips trembled before she spoke. "Please, help me." The words were barely a whisper, almost carried away by the wind. He blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. A stranger, and not just a stranger, an alien, was at his door in the dead of night. She tried to step forward but stumbled, her knees weak, almost collapsing into the mud outside. Instinct overtook his fear, and he reached out to catch her. Her body was ice cold, her breath shallow. He pulled her inside quickly, shutting the door behind them. The storm continued to rage outside, but now it was muffled, as if the house itself was holding its breath. For a moment, the two stood in silence, water dripping onto the wooden floor. The human finally found his voice. "What happened to you?" he asked, though gently, as if afraid she might shatter with the wrong word. Her eyes avoided his. She hugged herself tightly, shivering. "He abandoned me," she said at last. The way she said it, flat and broken, carried more pain than any scream. The human frowned. "Who?" "My husband," she replied, her voice almost breaking. "He called me dirty, said I am unworthy of him." The words stabbed through the air. The human had heard whispers of alien traditions, their obsession with bloodlines and purity, but never had he imagined one cast out in such cruelty. She looked at him again then, her eyes shimmering with tears that mixed with the rain on her cheeks. "He left me at your door? Because I have human blood in me." The man froze. The storm outside felt quieter suddenly, as if waiting for his reaction. His throat went dry. A dirty heritage, that's what the alien societies called them, those who carried human lineage in their veins. Rejected, mocked, sometimes even hunted. And now one of them stood trembling in his house, abandoned like trash in the night. Her knees buckled again, and this time he guided her gently to the chair near the fire. She sank into it, curling like a broken thing, hugging her arms around herself as though trying to disappear. He lit the fire quickly, throwing in extra wood, watching the flames rise and cast warm light across her face. For the first time, he noticed her features properly. Her skin was pale with exhaustion, her lips cracked, but beneath the wariness, there was undeniable beauty. Soft lines, delicate markings under her eyes that glowed faintly when the firelight touched them. He brought her a blanket, but she shook her head weakly. "I don't deserve it," she whispered. The words stunned him. "You're freezing," he said firmly, placing the blanket over her shoulders anyway. She trembled harder, but this time not from the cold. Her eyes overflowed, and silent tears ran down her cheeks. The human sat opposite her, the crackling fire the only sound between them for a moment. Finally, she spoke again. "He told me I was a mistake, that marrying me was a shame to his family. Tonight, he said he would erase that mistake. He threw me out. He told me this was where I belong, at the door of a human." Her voice cracked on the last word, her shame heavy as a chain. His fists clenched. He could almost see the alien husband's sneer, hear his cruel words. Anger burned inside him, but he pushed it down. Right now, she didn't need anger. She needed someone to see her, to listen, to care. Thunder growled outside, making the walls tremble. She flinched at the sound, shrinking deeper into the chair. He leaned forward, softening his tone. "You're safe here. No one will hurt you under my roof." Her wide eyes met his, uncertain, almost unbelieving. Why? I am nothing to you. To your people, I am less than nothing. The man held her gaze. To me, you are someone at my door in need of help. That's enough. For the first time, something shifted in her expression. The hopelessness did not vanish, but a faint spark appeared. Confusion. Maybe even fragile hope. She clutched the blanket tighter around herself, as though it was not just fabric, but a shield against the world that had thrown her away. The rain outside softened, though the storm was far from over. The house, however, felt strangely calm now. Yet beneath that calmness, tension lingered. Why had her husband left her here specifically? Was this meant to shame the human as well? Or was there more to come? As the firelight flickered, the human could not shake the feeling that the knock on his door had changed everything. This was no accident. This night was only the beginning. The storm outside continued through the night, but inside the small house, the fire gave a faint glow. The alien woman sat quietly, wrapped in the blanket he had given her. Her wet clothes clung to her skin, and her face was pale, as if she had not eaten properly in days. The human moved around slowly, unsure what to do. He placed a pot of warm water near her, handed her a cloth, and turned his back to give her privacy. She wiped her face and hands, whispering a soft thank you that almost got lost in the crackling of the fire. When she finally stopped shaking, he asked softly, "Do you want to rest?" She lifted her eyes at him, uncertain. Her lips parted, then closed again, as if she was fighting herself. "Rest?" she repeated, as though the word was something distant and forbidden. He pointed to the only bed in the small room. It was simple, with clean sheets and a single pillow. She stared at it with wide eyes, shaking her head. "No," she said quickly, her voice trembling. "I cannot. I will sleep on the floor." He frowned, confused. "The floor is cold. You'll get sick." She pulled the blanket tighter around herself. "It doesn't matter. I am used to it. I am not worthy to take your bed." Her tone was sharp, but behind it was only pain. She had accepted humiliation for so long that kindness frightened her more than cruelty. He knelt in front of her, trying to meet her eyes. "Listen, you are under my roof now. No one sleeps on the floor here." Her jaw tightened. "But you, where will you sleep?" "I'll manage," he said firmly. "You need the bed more than I do." For a long moment, she stared at him like she couldn't believe his words. Finally, with great hesitation, she stood up. Each step toward the bed was slow, heavy, as if her feet were made of stone. She touched the blanket on it with her trembling fingers, her expression unreadable. Then, without another word, she sat down carefully, as though afraid she might break the sheets just by being there. He watched her lower herself onto the bed. She kept to the farthest edge, curling into herself, leaving as much space as possible. It was clear she felt like an intruder in her own shelter. The human sighed and sat near the fire, pulling another small blanket over his shoulders. He thought she would finally fall asleep, but minutes passed, and he could still hear her shifting uncomfortably. When he looked back, she was staring at the ceiling, her eyes open wide in the dim light. "Can't sleep?" he asked quietly. She turned her face toward him, her voice barely audible. "The bed is too soft, too warm. I don't remember the last time I had this." He did not answer, because what could he say? Her words made his chest tighten. How many nights had she been treated as less than nothing? How many times had she been denied even the smallest comfort? Just as he was about to close his eyes and try to rest by the fire, a faint sound reached his ears. At first, he thought it was the wind rattling the shutters, but then he heard it again. Slow, deliberate steps outside. His head snapped toward the door. The alien woman heard it too. She sat up quickly, clutching the blanket to her chest, her eyes filled with fear. "He's here," she whispered, her voice breaking. The human's heart raced. He stood silently, moving closer to the door. The storm had calmed a little, so the footsteps were clearer now. They stopped right outside the house. For a long moment, there was only silence, as though whoever it was stood still, listening. The human held his breath, waiting. His hand hovered near the door latch, but he didn't open it. He felt her gaze on his back, full of terror. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the footsteps slowly faded away into the distance. He turned back to see her trembling harder than before. Her lips moved, but no sound came out at first. Finally, she whispered, "He will come again. He won't stop until I'm taken back." The human shook his head. "Not while you are here. You are safe with me." She looked at him, her eyes searching for any trace of doubt. What she saw instead was determination. He meant every word. For the first time, something in her chest eased, even if only a little. She lowered herself back onto the bed, though her body remained tense. He returned to his spot near the fire, but now sleep was impossible. He stayed awake, listening to every sound of the night, ready in case the footsteps returned. The storm outside whispered against the walls, but inside, a fragile silence held them both. As the hours dragged on, he glanced back once more. She had finally drifted into sleep, though her grip on the blanket was tight, as if she feared it would be torn away. Her face in sleep was softer, more vulnerable, almost childlike. The human leaned back against the chair, his thoughts heavy. A stranger, abandoned and broken, was now lying in his bed. He did not know what tomorrow would bring, but one thing was certain: his life would never be the same again. The knock at midnight had brought her into his world, but the moment she lay in his bed, he knew he had already stepped into hers. The morning came slowly, with the gray light of dawn pushing against the edges of the storm. The human had barely slept. His eyes burned from staying awake most of the night, but his mind refused to rest. He had heard the footsteps outside, the way they lingered near the door, and he knew they belonged to someone dangerous. He kept looking at the alien woman sleeping in his bed, curled tightly as if she was afraid even in her dreams. When she finally stirred, she looked around in confusion, as though unsure if the warmth and shelter were real. Then her eyes landed on him, sitting stiffly near the fire, and she lowered her gaze at once. "I didn't mean to cause you trouble," she whispered, her voice still heavy with fear. Before he could answer, there was a sharp, heavy knock on the door. Not like the weak, desperate tapping from the night before. This was strong, confident, and filled with anger. The woman froze, clutching the blanket to her chest. Her eyes widened with pure terror. "It's him," she breathed. The human rose to his feet slowly, his heart pounding hard in his chest. The knocking came again, louder this time, rattling the wood of the small house. He glanced back at her, and she shook her head violently, silently begging him not to open it. But he knew whoever was outside would not leave until he faced them. He pulled the latch and opened the door just enough to see. There, standing tall in the early morning light, was another alien. His features were sharp, his skin a darker shade, and his eyes burned with hatred. His clothes were clean despite the storm, his posture proud and unyielding. There was no doubt, this was the husband she had spoken of. The man outside sneered the moment he saw the human. "So it's true," he spat, his voice full of venom. "You've taken her in, a dirty heritage wife, abandoned by her own kind, now crawling into the bed of a human." The human's jaw tightened. "She came to my door half dead. I couldn't leave her outside." The alien's eyes narrowed. "She is mine. She carries my name, my claim. You will hand her over." Behind the human, the woman whimpered softly. She was shaking, her fingers digging into the blanket as if it were the only thing keeping her alive. Her lips parted, but no words came. The human stepped fully into the doorway, blocking the husband's view of her. "No, not after what you did to her." The alien's face twisted with fury. "You dare refuse me? You, human? Do you know who I am?" His voice rose, echoing in the quiet morning. "I cast her out because she is filth. She taints my line with her weak blood. But that doesn't mean you can claim what belongs to me." The human's fists clenched at his sides, his body tight with anger. "She doesn't belong to anyone. Not to you, not to me. She is her own." For a moment, there was silence, broken only by the distant dripping of rain from the roof. The alien's eyes blazed with fury. He stepped closer, his hand twitching near his belt where a weapon might have been. The human did not move, but his heart raced. He had no weapon, only his body and his will to protect. Inside the house, the woman found her voice. "Please," she cried, her tone broken, "just leave me. I am nothing to you. You said it yourself. Let me go." Her husband turned his head slightly, his gaze cutting through her like a blade. "You shame me," he said coldly. "You shame my family, but you are mine. Even in disgrace, you are mine. And this human." His eyes flicked back to the man standing firm in the doorway. "He will learn the price of stealing what is not his." The human stood tall, refusing to move aside. "If you want her, you'll have to go through me." The alien husband stared at him, measuring him, perhaps waiting for fear to show in the human's eyes. But there was none. Only steady resolve, a wall that could not be broken. Finally, with a sharp hiss of breath, the husband stepped back. His eyes burned with hatred, but his lips twisted into a cruel smile. "You don't know what you've done," he said. "This is not finished. You will regret this, human. Both of you will." He turned sharply and walked away, his steps heavy and full of rage. The morning air felt colder in his absence, as though he had dragged the warmth away with him. The human shut the door, his hands shaking slightly now that the danger had passed, for the moment. The woman was sitting on the bed, tears streaming down her face. She buried her face in her hands, whispering, "Why? Why do you stand for me? You don't know what this will bring." He crossed the room and knelt in front of her, gently lowering her hands from her face. "Because you deserve more than this," he said firmly. "You don't deserve to be thrown away like dirt. You don't deserve to live in fear, not while I can do something about it." Her eyes searched his, trembling with confusion and a kind of fragile hope she had long buried. For the first time, she whispered something new, almost too soft to hear. "Safe. You make me feel safe." He placed a hand gently on her shoulder, steady and warm. "You are safe, I promise." But even as he spoke, he knew the alien husband's words were not empty. The threat hung in the air like the last shadow of the storm. This was only the beginning, and the real fight had yet to come. The day dragged on with heavy silence after the confrontation. The alien husband's words echoed in the human's mind like a curse. "You will regret this." He knew danger was coming, but he did not let the fear show on his face. He kept himself busy with small tasks, fetching water, tending to the fire, anything to keep his mind from the weight of what had just happened. The alien woman sat quietly on the edge of the bed, her eyes fixed on the floor. She had not spoken much since the husband left, as if every word might summon him back. When night fell again, the storm outside had calmed. The air was colder now, biting even through the walls. The small fire he built struggled to push the chill away. He noticed her shoulders trembling beneath the blanket he had given her. She tried to hide it, pretending she was fine, but the shivers betrayed her. He went to fetch another blanket, but there was none. His home was simple, and he had little to spare. "You're still cold," he said gently, watching her hug herself. She shook her head quickly. "I'll manage. I don't want to cause you more trouble." He frowned. "It's not trouble. You'll get sick like this." Her eyes darted away, full of guilt. "I was told I was a burden since the day I was born. I can endure this." The human's chest tightened at her words. He hated how normal it sounded on her lips, as though she had accepted pain as her natural state. He stood there for a moment, struggling with the decision, before he finally said, "There's one way. Body warmth." Her head snapped up, her eyes wide. "What?" He hesitated but spoke calmly. "It's simple. Two people share heat by staying close. It works. You need warmth more than anything now." She looked at him as if he had suggested something impossible. Her face flushed slightly, though it was hard to tell if from shame or fear. I can't. I shouldn't." "You'll freeze if you don't," he said, his tone steady but kind. He did not move closer, only waited for her answer. For a long moment she sat still, her breathing uneven, then slowly she nodded. "Only because I don't want to die tonight." He gave her a faint smile. "That's reason enough." He sat beside her on the bed, careful to keep some space at first. The mattress dipped under his weight, and she stiffened instantly, clutching the blanket tighter. The silence between them was heavy, filled with her quickened breaths. But as the cold pressed harder, she finally allowed herself to shift closer. He opened the blanket slightly, letting the warmth of his body reach her. At first, she trembled even more, as though his presence frightened her. Then, slowly, the trembling began to fade. Her body leaned against his, her head lowering near his shoulder. Her skin was still icy, but little by little, he felt the warmth returning. Neither spoke for a long time. The fire cracked softly, shadows dancing across the room. Outside, the night was silent, but inside, two lives breathed in unison. She let out a shaky sigh, the kind that came not just from cold, but from years of carrying a weight too heavy. "No one has ever done this for me," she whispered finally, her voice so faint he almost missed it. "Not even him. He never once held me like this." The words struck him hard. He turned his head slightly, seeing her eyes half closed, a tear sliding down her cheek. She wasn't crying from sadness alone. It was something deeper, the pain of realizing what she had missed all her life. He tightened his arm around her just a little, enough to let her know she was not alone. "Then remember this night," he said softly. "Remember that you are not worthless. Not here. Not to me." Her breath caught, and for a moment he thought she might break into sobs. But instead, she buried her face against his chest, as if hiding her emotions in the safety of his warmth. His shirt grew damp with her silent tears, yet he did not move away. He held her quietly, giving her space to grieve in peace. As minutes turned into hours, her breathing grew slower, steadier. The fear that had haunted her since she arrived began to loosen its grip, replaced by a fragile calm. She was still broken, still scarred, but for the first time, she allowed herself to lean on someone else without shame. The human, too, felt a shift inside him. He had opened his door to a stranger, but now, sitting there with her in his arms, he felt the weight of responsibility settle into his heart. She was not just someone to protect. She was someone who deserved to live, to feel safe, to know kindness. And he would not let anyone take that away again. The night deepened. The fire burned low, but the warmth between them lingered. She whispered one last thing before sleep claimed her, her voice muffled against him. "If I dream tonight, I want it to be this, because for the first time, I don't feel cold." His chest tightened at the words, and he rested his chin lightly on her head, closing his eyes. The storm outside had ended, but inside, another storm was just beginning. Still, in that fragile moment, the only thing that mattered was the shared warmth, the unspoken promise that she would never be left to freeze alone again. The morning sun rose weakly, painting the village in pale light. The storm had passed, but the air outside carried a strange heaviness. The humans stepped out to fetch water, leaving the alien woman resting inside. As he walked along the narrow path, he noticed eyes on him. Neighbors stood by their doors, whispering to each other. Their gazes slid toward his house again and again. He felt the weight of their suspicion before he even heard their voices. When he returned, he carried the heavy bucket in silence, but the whispers followed him. Words drifted through the air like sharp blades. Alien woman, dirty heritage, staying in his bed, human fool. His jaw tightened, but he did not answer. He entered his home, closing the door firmly behind him, as though trying to keep the entire world out. The woman sat up when he returned. She looked better than the night before, though her eyes still held shadows. "People saw me, didn't they?" she asked quietly, already knowing the answer. He placed the bucket down. "It doesn't matter what they saw." Her lips trembled. "It matters to them. They'll say you are shamed. They'll say you are like me now, stained." Her voice broke on the last word, heavy with shame. He crossed the room and sat in front of her, meeting her downcast eyes. "Let them talk. Their words mean nothing." But she shook her head, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. "No. Their words mean everything. They will turn on you. You'll be an outcast, just like me. And it's my fault." He leaned forward, his tone firm but gentle. "You are not a fault. You are a person, and I will not throw you away just because they gossip." Her eyes filled with tears. She tried to speak, but her voice faltered. "You don't understand. Once whispers begin, they never stop. They grow louder, harsher. They push you out. Soon you'll have no friends, no one to trade with, no one to stand with you. I should leave before it happens." The human shook his head sharply. "No, you're not leaving. You came to my door, and that makes you my responsibility. More than that, you deserve safety. If they want to whisper, let them. I will not abandon you like he did." The strength in his voice made her freeze. She stared at him, shocked, as though she had never heard anyone speak about her like that. Slowly she whispered, "Why? Why would you do this for me?" He exhaled heavily, trying to find the right words. "Because you've been treated like less than nothing your whole life. Because I can't stand by and watch it continue. And because no one deserves to be alone in the cold." Her lips quivered, and she lowered her gaze again, hiding the tears that spilled down her cheeks. She did not argue further. Later that day, when he stepped outside again to chop wood, the whispers had turned into open words. A man from the village approached him, his expression hard. "We saw her," the man said bluntly. "She doesn't belong here. She'll bring trouble. Her kind always does." The human tightened his grip on the axe. "She's not trouble. She's just someone who needed help." The villager scoffed. "Help? You gave her your bed. Everyone knows. Do you think we'll forget? If you keep her, we'll cut you off. No trade, no aid. You'll stand alone. The human's eyes burned, but he said calmly, Then I'll stand alone. I don't need your approval. The man's mouth twisted in disgust. Fool, she'll drag you down. When her husband comes back, you'll be the first to pay. With that, the villager turned and left, muttering curses under his breath. The human stood there, his chest rising and falling with controlled anger. He knew the threats were real, but he also knew he could not give in. When he returned inside, the woman was waiting. She had heard everything through the thin walls. Her face was pale, and her voice shook. See? Because of me, they hate you now. I should go before it gets worse. He set the axe aside and looked at her firmly. No, if they hate me, let them. I don't care. What I care about is you. You're staying. Her eyes widened, and for a long moment she could not breathe. She had never been chosen before, never been defended, never been wanted. Her whole life she had been told she was a mistake, something to hide. Now, this human spoke as if her life mattered more than the judgment of an entire village. She clutched the blanket tighter, tears streaming freely now. Her voice cracked as she whispered, No one has ever stood for me. Not once, not my family, not him. Only you. The human's gaze softened. He reached out, placing a hand lightly on her arm. Then let this be the first time, and not the last. She lowered her head, overwhelmed, but for the first time since stepping into his home, she felt something unfamiliar. Belonging. That night, as they sat by the fire, she spoke in a quiet voice. The whispers will not stop. But maybe I don't care anymore, because here, with you, I feel safe. The human nodded slowly, understanding the weight of her words. The fire crackled softly between them, but it was not the flames that warmed her now. It was his presence, steady and unshaken, even against the world's judgment. And though danger still hung in the shadows, that night she allowed herself a small, fragile smile, because for the first time in her life, she was not running, not hiding. She was simply home. The days that followed were heavy with unease. The whispers of the villagers did not fade. Instead, they grew louder, bolder. People no longer hid their disapproval. They spoke loudly when the human passed by, making sure he could hear. Some spat on the ground, others turned their backs, refusing to meet his eyes. Yet he ignored them all. Each evening, when he returned home, he found the alien woman waiting by the fire, her eyes full of guilt and fear. She knew she was the reason for the hatred aimed at him, and though he tried to reassure her, the weight of it pressed harder on her heart. One evening, as the sky turned dark with gathering clouds, a shadow appeared at the edge of the village. The human was returning from the well when he noticed it. Several figures moving together, their steps purposeful. His chest tightened. He knew before they even reached his home who led them. The alien husband stood tall at the front, his face twisted in fury. Beside him were 3 others of his kind, larger and armed with cruel-looking blades. Their eyes burned with the same contempt. The human stopped in his tracks, gripping the bucket tightly, water spilling over the edge. When they reached his door, the husband shouted, his voice carrying across the village square. Human, come out and face me. The cry was loud enough that people began to gather, peering from their homes, eager to see what would unfold. The human set the bucket down and walked forward calmly, though his heart pounded like a drum. He opened the door to his house, stepping outside before the men could force their way in. Behind him, the alien woman gasped, fear making her body freeze. She wanted to beg him not to go, but her throat was locked tight with terror. The husband sneered when he saw him. You dare defy me again? I warned you, and yet you keep her. You shame me before my own people. The human stood tall, his face calm, though his blood boiled inside. You abandoned her. You called her filth and left her at my door to die. She is not yours anymore. The husband's hand went to his blade, pulling it free with a sharp metallic hiss. Everything she is belongs to me. Her blood, her body, her breath. You are nothing, human, and I will carve that truth into your skin. The alien woman cried out from inside. Please, don't. Leave him. This is between us. Her voice broke, but the husband ignored her. His rage was fixed on the human alone. The villagers whispered among themselves, some smirking, others watching with nervous eyes. No one stepped forward to stop it. No one offered help. The human realized he was truly alone in this stand, except for the trembling figure watching from the doorway. Still, he refused to move aside. He planted his feet firmly on the ground, meeting the alien's furious gaze. She's under my roof now. If you want to take her, you'll have to go through me. The alien husband laughed bitterly, a cruel sound that made the hair on the woman's neck stand. Through you? A weak human? You'll break before I even lift my hand. The three warriors behind him tightened their grip on their blades, waiting for a signal. The woman's eyes filled with tears as she whispered to herself, "He'll die. He'll die because of me." The human clenched his fists. He had no weapon, but he had his resolve. He raised his voice, strong enough for all to hear. "She is not your possession. She is not dirt. She is not filth. She is a living being, and I will protect her, even if it costs me everything." The words cut through the air like fire. The villagers fell silent. Even the husband's cruel smile flickered for a brief second before twisting again into anger. "Then so be it," he hissed, raising his blade. The alien woman could not hold back. She ran to the doorway, her voice cracking in desperation. "Stop! Don't hurt him! Please, take me instead. I'll go with you. Just don't kill him." Her tears streamed down her face, her hands shaking as she clutched the frame of the door. The husband's eyes narrowed. For a moment, he seemed satisfied by her plea, but then he looked at the human again, rage boiling. "No," he said coldly. "He must pay for standing against me." The human braced himself, his heart steady now despite the danger. His body was tense, ready to fight with bare hands if needed. He knew he could die, but he also knew that if he stepped aside, she would be dragged back into a life worse than death. He could not let that happen. Before the husband could strike, the alien woman's voice rang out again, stronger this time, shaking with fury. "No, you will not take me back. You will not own me anymore." Her body trembled, but her words were like iron. She had never shouted at him before, never dared. The husband froze for a moment, shocked at her defiance. The human stepped forward, his voice sharp. "You heard her. She doesn't want you. She doesn't belong to you." The husband's face twisted with rage, but the villagers were no longer whispering in amusement. They were silent, watching closely. Some even shifted uncomfortably, seeing the woman's courage for the first time. The alien husband lowered his blade slowly, his chest rising and falling with fury. He glared at the human, then at the woman. Finally, he spat on the ground. "This isn't over. You've both sealed your doom." With that, he turned sharply, signaling his men to follow. Their heavy steps faded into the distance, leaving only silence behind. The woman collapsed to her knees, sobbing into her hands. The human rushed to her side, lifting her gently. "It's over for now," he said softly, though his own heart still pounded. "You're safe." She clung to him tightly, shaking, whispering through her tears, "Why would you do this? Why risk your life for me?" He held her close, steady and warm. "Because you're worth it, and because I won't let anyone break you again." In that moment, something changed inside her. She looked up at him, her face wet with tears, and saw not just a man but a protector, someone who had chosen her when no one else would. And though the threat still lingered like a storm beyond the horizon, she knew she was no longer alone. The night after the confrontation was long and restless. The alien woman lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind heavy with fear. She kept hearing his voice, the cruel words of her husband, promising doom. But then another voice echoed louder, the human's, steady and fierce, saying she was safe, saying she was worth protecting. It was a strange feeling, one she had never known before. Someone had chosen her, not out of duty or shame, but because they believed she mattered. That thought carried her through the dark hours until sleep finally came. When dawn arrived, the village was quiet, but the silence felt different. People looked at the house with wary eyes, whispering less than before. Some still scowled, but others seemed thoughtful, uncertain after what they had witnessed. They had seen the humans stand against a stronger enemy without fear. They had heard the alien woman cry out her defiance for the first time. Something had shifted in the air, though no one dared to say it aloud. Inside the small home, the fire burned softly. The woman sat on the edge of the bed, watching the human as he moved about, preparing food. His movements were simple, steady, as if nothing extraordinary had happened the night before. Yet when he glanced at her, there was warmth in his eyes, a quiet strength that made her chest tighten. "You should eat," he said, placing a small bowl in her hands. She nodded, holding it carefully as though it was more than just food. Thank you, she whispered. Then, after a pause, she added, for everything. He smiled faintly. You don't need to thank me. Her eyes grew moist. No one has ever fought for me before. No one has ever stood between me and him. Not my family, not his people. Only you. The human sat across from her, his voice calm. Then let this be your new beginning. You don't belong to him anymore. You don't belong to anyone who would call you dirt. Her hands shook slightly as she lowered the bowl. But where do I belong? I've never had a place. Not in his house, not in his world, not even in mine. I was always between, a mistake. He leaned forward, his tone steady. You belong here if you want to, under this roof, by this fire, in that bed. You are not a mistake, you are a person, and you are safe with me. The words struck deep into her heart. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but she did not look away. For the first time, she felt like she could breathe without fear. Slowly, she whispered, then this is home, with you. The rest of the day passed quietly, though the weight of the past still lingered. When night fell again, the chill returned, sharper than before. The humans stoked the fire, but the cold still seeped into the small house. She pulled the blanket tighter around herself, but her body shivered. He noticed and spoke gently. The fire won't be enough tonight. You should rest. I'll keep watch. She shook her head. No, you need rest too. Her voice softened, almost breaking. Stay with me. He hesitated, but the look in her eyes left no room for refusal. He nodded and lay beside her on the bed. She curled close to him, her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. For a long time, neither spoke, but the silence was different now, softer, warmer. Finally, she whispered, do you know what I thought when he cast me out? I thought it was the end, that I would die in the rain, cold and unwanted. But then, your door opened, and you gave me a place. You gave me warmth. You gave me hope. His arms tightened around her gently. You're not unwanted, not anymore. You'll never be unwanted again. Her tears dampened his shirt, but they were not just tears of sorrow. They carried relief, release, the weight of years lifting from her shoulders. She closed her eyes, letting the warmth of his body seep into her bones. For once, she did not feel dirty or broken or unworthy. She felt human. She felt alive. The hours slipped by, and the fire burned low. But in that bed, she found something she had never known before, peace. She whispered one last thing before sleep claimed her. I never had a warm bed until you. Now I never want to leave it. The human's eyes softened at her words. He kissed the top of her head gently, a silent promise in the gesture. Outside, the world still whispered and judged. Danger still lurked, and the husband's shadow had not vanished completely. But inside those four walls, none of it mattered. In that bed, under the thin blanket, with her heart pressed against his, she was no longer an abandoned wife, no longer a mistake. She was simply a woman, chosen and cherished, and for the first time in her life, she belonged. And the human, holding her close, knew he had found something too. What began as a knock in the storm had become the start of something he never expected, a bond stronger than fear, stronger than shame, stronger than the hatred of others. It was fragile, but it was real, and it was enough. That night, the bed was no longer just a place to rest. It became home. It became family. It became the promise of a future neither of them had dared to dream before.